Hi guys! Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in November. I had such a good reading month, both in quantity and quality, so I'm so excited to jump right into this. Starting off with Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. This is her debut adult novel, and it was so atmospheric, like the perfect book to read on a rainy day. This book follows August and Emery and jumps back and forth between different points in their lives. We start off with August returning to their home island of Saoirse after a long time being away, and the island of Saoirse has like this magical sort of element to it. The women in this town can perform magic, but it's not very like widely talked about. It's just sort of accepted. And when August and Emery were teenagers, there was this very eventful night upon their graduation from high school where there was a really big fire, and also Emery's friend is found dead. And August is kind of the number one suspect for some reason, and to make matters worse, him and his mom end up fleeing, which just makes him look more suspicious. And so I believe it's about 10 years later when he returns, they sort of get closure on these events finally, and this was a really good mystery. I liked the way that Adrienne Young broke up the timeline where it wasn't just continuous, it was jumping back and forth, kind of revealing things as necessary. I loved the way that the story unfolded. I was so intrigued. I was trying to guess what was going on the entire time, and again, this was just so atmospheric. If you like cozy rainy day reads and magical realism, I think this is a perfect book to pick up, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This month I also finished the Caraval series with Finale, and I've said it once and I'll say it a million times, Stephanie Garber knows how to write a really fun story. I loved the way this wrapped up. We had these mysteries woven through all 3 books that kind of all came to a conclusion in this one. I just thought it was so fun. I liked that we got Scarlett and Donatella as POV characters in this one, where like the first 2 books were sort of mainly in one or the other's perspective. I liked the romance elements. I loved all the characters. Stephanie Garber just writes really compelling character relationships. Also, like, people who aren't necessarily good, but like you're rooting for them. They're so compelling. I had so much fun with this series. I do like the Once Upon a Broken Heart spin-off series a tad bit better. And I think that's just shows that Stephanie Garber's really grown as an author throughout her time writing Caraval, and then later on Once Upon a Broken Heart and Ballad of the Never After. This whole world is so fun and whimsical, and there's definitely dark elements, but just the way that she writes it is so entertaining, and I can't put these books down. I fly through them, and they're just such a joy to read. Overall, I think I gave every book in this series 4 out of 5 stars, and then so far Once Upon a Broken Heart and The Ballad of Never After have both been 5 stars. Again, she's only gotten better, and I love it. I'm so glad that I went back and read the original series. Then I picked up quite another atmospheric book, and that was Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey. This is about a biologist that is leading a project that reintroduces wolves into the wilds of Scotland, and this initiative is technically better for the environment. Introducing predators back into the nature of Scotland is going to be helpful for its ecology overall, but she faces a lot of pushback from the native people and the farmers. There's a lot of conflict and tension going on, and as you can see, this is a very short read. It's a very fast read. I thought the environmentalism was really interesting, and I feel like I learned a lot. There is a bit of a murder mystery element in this as well, which was intriguing, but I feel like I figured it out really early. But yeah, overall, I quite enjoyed this. There's a romance that I didn't totally love, but I think that's just because the romance was not the main focus of this book. It was sort of just a plot line that padded it out, and I prefer, if there is a romance, that it's a little bit more well-developed than it was in this book. But overall, I thought this was really interesting. I think I also gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Once again, very atmospheric, perfect fall or kind of gross weather read. I will say the ending, there is a really brutal, mild spoilers, birthing scene, and I think that some people who are sensitive to that might have a hard time reading that. I know I was just my knuckles were white, like reading it. It was really intense. So just keep that in mind going into it. But other than that, really good read, and I quite enjoyed it. This next book, I knew I was gonna like. I only heard good things about it, and the things that I have heard about it were like things that just check all my boxes. But I was definitely surprised at like how much I needed to immediately pick up the sequel. And that is the Strange the Dreamer duology. This was on my TBR. Muse of Nightmares was not, but I found that when I finished Strange the Dreamer, my heart was just not ready to move on to another story. And if you've read this, you probably know why. I immediately needed to know what the heck was gonna happen next. This threw off my TBR plans a little bit for the month, but it was so worth it. This duology is so beautiful. This story has two main characters. One of them is Laszlo Strange, and he is an orphan boy who grows up to be a librarian, and his entire life he's been obsessed with stories about this place that has been lost to time called Weep. And Weep is not its original name, but when he was young, there was a moment in time that he like viscerally remembers where he went from remembering what the place was called to having the knowledge like ripped from his head, and everyone forgets what the name of this place is. And it is such a profound moment in his life, and the sense of loss that he feels over that is so extreme. And just the way that Laini Taylor wrote that was, oh my god, it was so moving. Like, this place is so real to him, even though he's never been there. And when he's older, he's a young man, he gets the opportunity to actually go to the lost city of Weep. It kind of has Atlantis vibes, if you've seen that, The Lost Empire. Laszlo reminds me a little bit of Milo, not gonna lie, but like only in the best ways. Him and this party of people with varied specialties go to Weep to kind of help them with a very specific problem. Our other main character is a young woman named Sarai, and she is the daughter of a god, basically, and her skin is blue. Her family, like all their skin is blue. You don't really know what's up with them, but they live in this citadel that hovers over Weep. And this citadel is a really stark reminder of, or for the people of Weep, of horrible times, and they don't know that Sarai and her family are still up there. So there's a lot of tension. There's really high stakes in this story. The characters are so good. I love Laszlo. He's one of my like new favorite characters, and Sarai as well. They just, they're so compelling. I don't know, there's just a lot of layers going on, and then Laini Taylor's writing is so beautiful. There were just like, I wanted to highlight, and I'm not a highlighter or a tabber, but like there were just so many quotes, and I was like, that is the most beautiful way you could have phrased that. So yeah, I loved this story. I own her Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, and I cannot wait to dive into that. I've been excited to read that one for quite some time, but I knew I wanted to start with Strange the Dreamer just because this called out to me a little bit more, but I was so excited to continue with her catalog. Strange the Dreamer was 5 stars for me. Muse of Nightmares was 4 stars, but really strong duology. Probably one of my favorite duologies that I've read this year. It was so good, and I've already been like telling my friends, you need to read this. So it's a sign of a good book. Then I picked up the sequel to Legendborn, which is Bloodmarked. This just came out in November, and I was so anticipating it. It was one of those books that I was like, I need to read this as soon as I get my hands on it. It did get a little pushback by Muse of Nightmares because that was unplanned, but this book was excellent as well. And Legendborn follows the story of this young woman named Bree. She's 16 years old, and she ends up going to this early college program at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And right before this, Bree lost her mom, and she's really struggling with grief. So getting the opportunity to go to college early kind of allows her a little element of escapism, but she still feels like very fundamentally changed by this sense of loss and development in her life. She winds up kind of stumbling into a demon attack on campus, and then finding out about the secret society that surrounds King Arthur and his knights and their descendants. She gets wrapped up in this because she thinks it might have something to do with her mom's death, and it's just a really, like, the first book is such a fun, like, it's a school setting, and then there's like these trials as she's trying to get into this secret society, and there's this really amazing, compelling love triangle that I'm obsessed with. The way the first book ends was incredible. Like, the ending alone was 5 stars. Like, as I was reading, I'm like, this is a 5-star read. And I was already really enjoying the book, so that just like cemented it for me. So again, when this one came out, I needed to get my hands on it as soon as possible. I really had no idea where this one was gonna go. I had certain expectations, but like, those were completely shattered. I think a huge element of that is that Bree faces racism in a way that just like I am not capable of even picturing, because I've never had to go through some of this stuff like she has. And it really just like fundamentally changed the path that I saw these characters going on, just because my experience is so different from Bree's and even Tracy Deon's, I'm sure. So this was an incredible read. It was really infuriating in a lot of parts. The first 200 pages, I was so anxious reading. It was a lot. So definitely like, don't go into this story lightly. Like, there's a lot of really dark stuff that these characters have to deal with, but oh my gosh, incredible story. So much happened. This was such an exciting sequel. I loved the developments that occurred. I love Selwyn. But overall, I love Bree and I love her story, and I can't wait to see where this goes. I have no idea how many books are supposed to be in the Legendborn cycle, but I will read all of them, basically. I cannot wait for the third one. And I gave this 5 stars, if that wasn't obvious. Then I read another really anticipated book of mine for this year, and that is Stephen King's Fairy Tale. This is a standalone portal fantasy novel by Stephen King, and it's been a very long time since I've picked up a Stephen King book. I went through kind of a phase in high school where I picked up some of his greatest hits, like The Stand, Misery. I never read it because I don't do clowns, but this was just so different from anything else that I've read by him. And I think both, like, in that it is not a horror novel and the amount of time that has passed between the books that I've read by him, like when those were initially published and this one, I had this very weird experience in the beginning of this when I realized that, like, I am older than this main character, like, not just because, oh, it's in the 80s and these kids are 12 years old, like it is, but like, this character was born in 1996 and I was born in 1994, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm older than a Stephen King protagonist. So that was a weird feeling. So this story follows Charlie, who is a 17-year-old kid, and he ends up, through a strange sort of turn of events, befriending this old man who is sort of known to be curmudgeonly and kind of a bit of a hermit. He doesn't like to leave the house. One day, Charlie ends up helping him and befriending the old man's dog. This friendship leads to Charlie eventually finding a portal into a different world that is very, like, fairy tale-esque and just magical, and it was a lot. A lot happened in this book, especially where it's a standalone. I do like Stephen King's nods to traditional fairy tales. There's a lot of, like, references and winks and stuff, and then there's some, like, outright, like, conclusions that Charlie makes and, like, references that he himself recognizes. So I don't know, it was fun. I really enjoyed the first half and watching the friendship develop between Charlie and Mr. Bowditch, the old man. It was really touching, and I think Stephen King is really good at writing character relationships like that, and he's really good at writing, like, old men characters. I don't know what that says about me, where I'm like, I'm very drawn to, like, grouchy old men characters, like Grunkle Stan from Gravity Falls. He gave me that kind of vibe. Then also the relationship that Charlie had with the dog, Radar, was really touching. I was very anxious about the dog the entire book, I will say that. So if that's something that gives you anxiety, bear that in mind going into it. But yeah, I thought this was a fun adventure. Very classic portal fantasy, if that's your thing. Think like, you know, Narnia or Alice in Wonderland. There were a couple elements that are like parts of the narrative that I thought were really drawn out unnecessarily, but that's just sort of Stephen King. He's a bit long-winded, so I think as long as you know that going into it, you'll have a fun time. I gave this like 3.5 stars. I had a good time reading it. There were some things that I didn't love about it, but this was a fun book and it went places I was not expecting, so really took me by surprise. I also read a bunch of manga this month, and this isn't going to take too long because one of these is like a whole series, and I'm just going to talk about it all together. That is the A Sign of Affection series by Sue Morishita. This is only 5 volumes out in English at the moment. I believe volume 6 comes out in like March, And this is just the cutest, softest little love story. We follow a deaf girl and this boy that she meets on the train who he likes to learn like a lot of languages and he likes to travel and stuff. So when he realizes that she's using sign language, he is very intrigued by her and like wants to learn sign language to communicate with her and stuff. And they just form this really cute relationship. I think this is also very like female gazy in a way that like a lot of manga is not. There's a lot of focus on hands and lips and like gentle caresses of the face. I think if you like K-dramas, there's a lot of elements that like you'll like about this. And yeah, this is just the cutest little story. These characters are in college, which is kind of a refreshing change from, I feel like a lot of shoujo or like romance stories follow more like teen characters, but they're like early 20s kind of on average. But yeah, so this was just so cute. I loved it. I also got my best friend Stephanie to read them and she loved them too. So I think if you just want something soft and cute and fluffy, low stakes, this is a perfect read to pick up, and they're very fast. So I loved these. This is pretty much 5 stars across the board. And then I picked up volume 2 of Kami-sama Kiss. I read volume 1, I believe in October upon Stephanie's recommendation, and I thought it was a lot of fun. We follow a teenager named Minami who ends up becoming like the caretaker of a shrine, not like of her own intention, but like she ends up being responsible for the spirits of this shrine, and she has a lot of power being the caretaker of this shrine. But where she's human, a lot of yokai or demons want her for her power. Like they basically want to like eat her. So she has to be very on guard. And in the first volume, she ends up getting kicked out of her apartment. Her dad goes on the run because he's in severe debt, and so that's kind of how she ends up moving into this shrine. In this one, she ends up going back to school after a period of being away and like not wanting to face her classmates who all know of this like horrible predicament financially that she's been in. And yeah, it's cute. This is that very like traditional shoujo manga, whereas like they're high schoolers and there's like kind of something fantastical and paranormal going on. But this is adorable. I love this series. I've already ordered volumes 3 and 4 because I can't find them at my local bookstores. I think it's a little bit older, but this is a lot of fun. And if you're kind of more into or want to get more into Japanese mythology, I think this is a fun introduction to that. And then I finally found volume 1 of Witch Hat Atelier. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a French word. It means workshop or like studio. But this is such a cute story. I don't know what genre this falls under. I guess maybe shonen. I don't know. It's almost middle grade-y actually, because the main character is very young. Her name's Coco, and she helps her mom in their I believe like her mom's a tailor and she helps her out. She's always dreamed of having magic, but in this world, one must be born with magic. So she kind of resigns herself to the fact that she doesn't have the ability, but she loves it. She loves to witness it. She just thinks it's like such this precious and beautiful thing. And when she was young, she ended up buying a like grimoire, and she's obsessed with it and knows it front to back. Eventually their shop gets visited by a witch, and she finds out through him that one does not have to be born with magic. It's something that you have to like draw runes and symbols for. As soon as she finds that out, she's very excited and starts drawing all the runes that she finds from her book. But then something horrible happens as a result of it because she's so uneducated in the matter. And this witch ends up taking her with him to become an apprentice of his. And so this book is really just kind of setting that foundation. Coco establishing herself as an apprentice and meeting the other apprentices. And I just thought the magic system in this was so cute. And then the illustrations are gorgeous. I believe Kamome Shirahama, the author or the mangaka, also illustrated like comic covers for DC and Marvel. And it's just like, it's some of the most beautiful manga illustrations I've ever seen. They're so detailed and beautiful. And I just love this story. It's got that darkness, but it's also whimsical, and I can't wait to see where it goes. This is a really fun series, so I was really excited to finally find volume 1, because this is one of those ones that's really hard to find volume 1 for some reason. And that wraps up my reading for November. Again, some really solid reads. I'm really happy with the amount of novels I was able to get through, and like some of them were quite like hefty too. And then the fact that a lot of them were 5 stars or 4 stars was also great. I just I love that I discovered Strange the Dreamer finally, and like how much I loved it. And then Bloodmarked was so good, and then they were just, everything was really good. I did not have a single bomb this whole month, so very relieved. I feel like I needed that. It really rejuvenated my energy about reading. So I'm going into December also still riding that high, and hopefully I can continue it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Please feel free to let me know down in the comments what you read this month, or if you've read any of these books and would love to talk about them. I'm happy to engage in a conversation about it. Also, feel free to like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, have a lovely day.